What if I told you that vulnerability could be your greatest strength? Look, especially in circles of men, vulnerability is often seen as a sign of weakness, and traditional definitions will, in fact, encapsulate that idea. But I want to challenge that. I want to help you to become more vulnerable and ultimately to become more strong so you can live as the men that God created you to be. What's up, everybody? It's Ryan James Miller, and I am back for another episode in this series of the Unstarved Man. This is a podcast series that I'm doing inside of the Unlocking Greatness podcast to help men that are starved emotionally, those that are struggling to understand and express their emotions, to leverage them, and ultimately to use them for good, to help them serve the people around them, and ultimately succeed in the ways that they believe they have been called to. On this specific episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about vulnerability, and I want to help to better define how I see vulnerability playing out in society, in my life, and hopefully in your life today. I want to talk about the benefits of embracing vulnerability. I mean, if we're going to do something, there should be a benefit to us in doing that, and I believe I've got some great thoughts for you here to be very helpful. And then make sure that you listen to the end, all the way to the end of this episode, because I'm going to be sharing with you some practical steps to become more vulnerable. Look, it's one thing to talk about ideas in theory. It's another thing to put them into practice. And through the writing of my book, Wounds, through the experiences of my own life and my own journey, as well as journeying through the lives of so many men that I've coached over the years, I believe I have a good handle on what it means to be vulnerable. This is not easy. I'm not saying that I have this all figured out, that I nail this every single day, but I believe that I can help you to become more vulnerable. And I want to make a case as to why that is so incredibly important. All right, so let's talk a little bit about vulnerability. So vulnerability, by definition, the definition actually says being susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. Being susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. I mean, who the heck wants that? I don't. I don't think you do. And all the way back to Adam and Eve in the garden, they didn't want that either. Men and women throughout history did not want to be vulnerable. They did not want to be vulnerable to their surroundings. They did not want to be vulnerable to their enemies. Vulnerability in this sense was not something anybody strived for. As a matter of fact, we want to be aware. We want to be able to protect ourselves. We want to be prepared to defend ourselves and ultimately to engage in whatever is necessary to protect ourselves and those around us from physical and emotional harm. I mean, it just makes so much sense. And so when we start talking about this idea of vulnerability, especially in men, they run away. You probably, even for those of you that listen to my podcast, you get me, we're probably similarly aligned in life and values. There is still some idea here, some sense of this. You're like, no way, Ryan. No way am I going to be seen as a vulnerable man. And I get it. I don't want to be that way. I think about what it was like growing up. I think about being a scrawny kid. I was beanpole. I was tall and shaped like a beanpole. I think that going through high school, I was probably 6'1", $145 wet or something like that. And I would have never really been able to engage in any conflict that would have properly defended myself. I wasn't trained to fight. I wasn't built that way. I didn't have that type of aggression really in me. No fault to her, but I was raised by a single mom that was very empathetic, compassionate, sweet, and loving and caring and nurturing. So I just didn't have that. My dad, actually, he was a badass. My dad was a police officer early in his life. He had to retire due to injury, and he went on to become an entrepreneur. But my dad was the epitome of a strong and tough man. My dad had a heavy hand. My dad exercised authority. My dad's words were just badass. I mean, it definitely cast fear into myself and to my brothers. And so I saw that, but I think because I was so afraid of that, from crossing my dad, that I just didn't pick that up. And yet, as I got into high school, particularly, I started to develop this desire to be seen as strong, not vulnerable, not weak. And eventually, as I share in my book, I would get involved into a crowd or a crew of guys that were very tough, that fought all the time. I got thrown into that quite often. And so I began to posture in such a way that would prevent people, most likely, I'm sure some people saw it through it, but would prevent people from seeing my vulnerability, from seeing my weakness. And so this has been a struggle of mine for many, many years. And even now, I think about the fact that I've grown up, I've matured, I've become quite a bit stronger, filled out, I guess you could say, hopefully in good ways, not in bad. But still now, like as much as I talk about and want to be vulnerable and encourage particularly other men to be vulnerable, there is still this part of me that says, I don't want people to see me as weak. I don't want people to think that they can walk all over me. I don't want people to think that they can cross me. And I think there's some good in that, but that can get really dangerous really quickly because we can often then put on this mask, put up this shield that prevents ourselves from being vulnerable in situations that we should and we need to. I want to help us take on a different definition. Now, I've always said, you've always heard me say that words matter. And words matter here a lot. I also believe that the truth matters, and there is one truth, that is God's word. I don't think there's my truth and your truth. I think those are all our opinions, and so we have to be really careful about speaking the truth. I think we have to be really careful about manipulating words to our benefit. And so even here, when we talk about vulnerability, I want to talk about vulnerability in a different context. As it stands, vulnerability, the definition is being susceptible to physical or emotional attack. I believe that is still a real and true definition. I don't want to manipulate that. But what I want us to see is that there is a way that we can leverage vulnerability in different contexts. I want us to see that in the context of our own growth, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, in our relationships, vulnerability is far different. Vulnerability is about openness. It's about authenticity, and it is about seeing yourself for who you truly are. Now, I didn't necessarily plan this today, but this just happens to be the day that I'm in my Be Authentic sweatshirt, my Be Authentic hat, and Be Authentic is on the wall behind me. And so there's a lot of authenticity around. But authenticity is so incredibly important. The definition of authenticity: to be of known origin, to know where you come from, meaning to know who you are. And once we know who we are, then we can live as that person. So being vulnerable is oftentimes just living as the person that we were created to be. This doesn't mean that you open up the kimono to everybody, or for those that don't know that definition, this doesn't mean that you just open up your life's history and every ugly skeleton in the closet to the world. But it does mean that you open yourself up to more people, that you become open to more people. Vulnerability requires courage that I believe most men don't possess. Women, I believe by nature, are created with an inherent desire or characteristic of vulnerability. And I'm not talking about the weakness that everybody says women are, or many people say women are created with. I don't believe that. I believe women are created just as strong, but in very different ways, oftentimes, than men. But I believe that women have traits and characteristics that God has inherently put into them that makes them incredible nurturers, lovers, mothers. And so I believe that vulnerability is just something that women by nature practice better, that they are more open, that they are more honest, that they are more transparent oftentimes about their feelings. And I respect that. Men, on the other hand, are conditioned to exercise toughness. Oftentimes, they're conditioned to build walls, to be perceived as strong, even sometimes to be perceived as stronger than they are, like the example I gave you as I was working through high school. And so I want to change that. I want to help bend the narrative. I want to help men see that being vulnerable is one of the strongest things that you can do. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with other people. Doing so is going to lead to a far more meaningful life. It is also going to lead to far more beneficial relationships. So let's dig into the benefits. What I see are some of the most immediate benefits or greatest benefits to being vulnerable. And there are 4 of them: enhanced relationships, emotional resilience, personal growth. You know what? Let's stick with 3. I think that for sake of time, I think these 3 will be most helpful. So enhanced relationships, emotional resilience, and personal growth. 3 big benefits to you and I as men becoming more vulnerable. As I've said, by the way, many times throughout the first couple of episodes of this series, and what I'm going to say again is ladies, please don't check out, because you have a lot of men in your life that you would love to be more vulnerable. Your husbands, maybe your brothers, maybe your fathers, your sons. And I believe that I can offer some practical insight to help you encourage them to be more vulnerable. And if I can't do that, if we can't do that together, then maybe you just need to share this episode with them and let them see it for themselves. Okay. So let's talk about enhanced relationships. Being vulnerable opens up an opportunity to be more real in our relationships. I am so tired of fakeness. I am so tired of all these people that desire to live these like fake it till you make it, hollow friendships, relationships, the hey, how you doing? The I'm affiliated with yous. You know, I see this a lot in business where people pretend to be friends with other people because it benefits their business. Now, I'm not saying you have to love everybody that you do business with, but I am going to say that you should be aligned to the people that you do business with. If you know that you're in business with somebody that is not aligned to your values, that goes against who you are, you got to do something about it. Like this for me is really important. And I'm going to talk about marriage relationships as well in a second here. But, you know, if I was to find out that a man was willingly cheating on their spouse, and I'll preface the willingly in a second. If I found out that a man was willingly cheating on their spouse and they were a client of mine, I would fire them immediately. And the only exception to that rule would be if they were repentant of that huge error in judgment and action, and they were doing everything they could to restore that relationship with their spouse. Because we all make mistakes. That's a grave one, but we all make mistakes and we all need grace. I was about to say we all deserve grace, but we don't deserve grace, but we do need it. And because I believe that Jesus has extended infinite grace to me, I believe that I can extend as best as I can infinite grace to other people. But they've got to be repentant. I don't want to see men flirting with other women, when they're out in business deals. I don't want to see men in strip clubs when their wives would despise of that. Even if they don't despise of that, I don't think men should ever be in strip clubs when they're married. I've shared that on other podcasts before, so I'll leave that to another episode. You can chase that down a rabbit hole. But I just believe that men must have integrity. And so if a man is not exercising integrity, I don't want to be in a relationship with them. Anyway, so in business relationships, being vulnerable offers us the opportunity to grow more together, to succeed more together. Now, this definitely happens in the context of coaching. The more vulnerable my clients are with me, the more vulnerable I am with them, benefits our relationship significantly. Most often, I will find that a client will engage me initially to help them in some aspect of their business. They want to generate more revenue. They want to grow the business. They have a challenge operationally that they want me to help them overcome. They've got some leadership or team challenges that they want me to help them work through. But before long, every single one of my client relationships also ends up discussing personal challenges with their marriage, with their children, with themselves. Because all of those things hinder somebody's ability to succeed. When those things are not well, it is really hard to succeed, at least sustainably. So vulnerability is definitely key in my relationships, but it should be key in every business relationship. Be honest, be open about your shortcomings, about your doubts. Let your partners, the people that you are aligned in business with, whether that's a vendor, whether that's a customer, let them know where you're really at. And obviously, context is key here. You're not going to open up about your dirtiest, darkest secrets to a brand new client. But at the same time, quit trying to pretend like you're perfect. Quit trying to pretend like you have it all together. If you want to build incredible amounts of trust in your business relationships, those that can endure failures and shortcomings, be more vulnerable with them. As it relates to our romantic relationships, and particularly our marriages, or for those of you that are dating and you have your eye on the marriage prize, I would say that vulnerability is everything. You know, I shared earlier or last week, a week before recording this, I shared on Instagram that I was going to be doing a episode on vulnerability. And one young man specifically, he responded to me and he shared just an incredibly vulnerable moment that he had with his wife, having to do with their sexual relationship. And it's so interesting to me because as he shared it, I put myself right into that situation. You know, I've been married 23 years and trying to keep this PG. I will say that throughout the course of my relationship with my wife, we've had a fantastic sex life. And yet there are times when we have expectations on both sides of the equation that are not being met. That could be the nature of our intimate time. That could be the frequency of our intimate time, whatever. And it's wild to me that after 23 years, it's still a hard conversation to approach. You know, I think that we often rely on our anger to express our needs in our relationships. And I believe that that is such a mistake because we often say things we don't mean. Or we let ourselves get to the point that we're frustrated that we end up saying things that we feel but aren't deep down really true. But because we've let them get too far, we cause all kinds of struggle. And so we have to learn to be more proactively vulnerable and open in our communication with our spouses far before we go down a bad road. And so as it relates to this topic of sex, which is a big one in marriages and a difficult one, at least, I mean, I would love to hear from you. And again, this is a hard one to comment on, right? But I would love to hear from you if you've got this discussion nailed down. But this is not easy. And yet I would encourage you to practice vulnerability and openness of communication with your spouse in positive situations. Take your wife out on a date. And during your date, again, as appropriate, speak to her about how you feel the state of your sex life is, about what you would like, you would like to see it go, how you would like to see it grow. Ask of her. Here's talking about being very vulnerable. Ask her how you can better meet her needs. I know you think that you nail it, but trust me when I say you can always do better, because I know I can always do better. But you've got to be vulnerable enough to open up about that, to be honest about the fact that you don't have it all together, but you want to be better for her. Vulnerability extends far outside of that. Be open and honest with your spouse about your struggles. You should never have to pretend that you have it together in front of your spouse. And if you've entered into a relationship or gotten married under that pretense, you got to break it. Because if not, it will break you. When it comes to the benefits of embracing vulnerability, you guys, this is not just about other people interacting with others. It's about yourself. Emotional resilience can be elevated significantly when we learn to become more vulnerable. When we can address our emotions, when we can be honest about the fact that we don't have it all together, it's so funny to me how I've said this before, but I can't believe how often we lie to ourselves. I shared something on Instagram this morning, and it was just a simple picture of me taking a picture of myself in the mirror at a gym that I was traveling in. And again, there's different context to that. So I don't take selfies of myself in the gym very often. Anyway, but I posted that picture, and the caption simply said, "The mirror's not a liar, you are." And I years ago heard Matt Chandler, he's a pastor at the Village Church in Texas, say, "You lie to yourself more than anybody else." And man, is that so damn true. We put up this front with ourselves. And sometimes we start to convince ourselves that it's actually true, that we've got it together, that we're nailing it, that we can endure. The pressure just mounts and we start to crack. And then eventually we break and our emotions run wild. You see, we can only encapsulate them. We can only pretend to protect them for so long before they just finally go crazy. And oftentimes for men, that leads to outbursts of anger and rage, or worse yet, self-harm, and ultimately suicide, which I've shared before in this series. Men are committing suicides at the rate of 75% to women committing suicides at 25% in the United States right now. 75% of all suicides. My desire is that we would have zero suicides in this country, in this world. But the fact of the matter is 75% of all suicides are men, and oftentimes that's because they are living this life that they can't sustain. They are pretending themselves out of existence. And my encouragement to you is to be vulnerable. It starts with yourself, and then it quickly opens up to a supportive community, your spouse and your closest guy friends that will help walk through this journey with you. The more that you are vulnerable, the more that you understand your emotions, that you're able to proactively deal with them, that you're able to reactively deal with them when things outside of your control happen, and fight against your ability to stabilize them, you will become more emotionally resilient, not impenetrable. Resilience is our ability to endure and ultimately to succeed through the challenges that we're facing. And it requires a heavy dose of emotional resilience to go through some of the things that we deal with in society today. The stresses of your business, of your health, of your family, of finances. Emotional resilience is absolutely critical. And third, and these two really roll into the third one, but the third benefit to being vulnerable is growth, personal growth. Vulnerability is the pathway to self-discovery, and self-discovery is ultimately the key to achieving the life of your dreams. Let me say that again. Vulnerability is the pathway to self-discovery, and self-discovery is the pathway to living and achieving the life of your dreams. You guys, you have created plans, you have created strategies, you have created processes to build successful businesses, and keep doing that. But have you done the same thing for your own personal growth and development? Chances are no, because I run across so many of you and you haven't. You don't have the tools. I do, and I would love to be able to offer those to you. But you have to want it. And oftentimes, it starts with being vulnerable enough to say, I'm not nailing it. I don't have it all together. I'm scared. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. I'm out of answers. I don't know what to do. And most importantly, I need help. That's how you become more vulnerable. That's how you ultimately will get to achieving the life that you dream of. As we grow, we start to understand our feelings. We acknowledge our feelings. This is all part of this journey to no longer starve ourselves emotionally, to become emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically fit. Vulnerability is huge, huge, huge in that endeavor. You know, there's so much talk about vulnerability, and I'm encouraged by it. I love to see so many celebrities that are talking more and more about vulnerability. I've heard guys like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, who's talked about some of his own struggles with mental health. We've seen other popular figures in society that have very much shared the same thing, their own battles with depression and anxiety, and it's super encouraging to see. But don't let it just be a story you hear. Let it be the inspiration to begin changing yourself, to begin growing yourself. Okay, here are 4 steps that you can take to embrace vulnerability. So it's one thing to decide, right? We have to decide we want to do it. That's number one, and that comes before this. But once you decide, you know what? I do need to become more vulnerable. You know what? Vulnerability will benefit me. You know what? I want to become more vulnerable for myself and for others around me. Here's 4 steps that you can take that will help you to become more vulnerable. Number 1, start small. You know, I used to have this stupid saying. I mean, I guess I use it sometimes, but it was really stupid when I said it before. It was go big or go home. Go all the way or don't go at all. All in all the time or don't waste your time. Go big or go home is a disaster a lot of the time. And, you know, for us guys, especially when we set out to achieve new goals, man, we throw some massive goals up there, especially for those of us that are entrepreneurially minded, that run businesses, that lead businesses. You know, we have this desire to just boom, go for it, to just crush it, to make a big name for ourselves, to make a big impact. And that's all great. But we have to start small. If you try to do too much too quick, it's going to crush you, especially when it comes to vulnerability. So my encouragement to you would be to start by sharing small aspects of your struggles with those closest to you. Could be a friend, could be a family member, could be a therapist, or it could be a coach. I mean, I've shared with you before in this episode that, in my relationship with my clients, it often starts off in baby steps. It takes some time. Like, they're willing to come right out and tell me what they want. They're willing to come right out and say, like, what is it going to take to get there? But it takes some time, oftentimes, for them to trust me enough to just be vulnerable. I think to one specific client that I was working with, and man, it took a lot for him to start working with me. His wife actually engaged me first. We together, he and his wife and I were able to convince him to at least talk to me. We started working together and it was incredible. And it was powerful and transformational from the moment we started working together. And those weren't my words, those were his. But it took about 4 months of meeting 2-3 times a month before his deepest, darkest, most painful moment came out. But once it came out, everything changed. And he's a completely different man because of that moment. Both because of what happened to him in the past, but also because in that moment of his vulnerability, I was truly able to see him for who he was, truly able to understand why he was struggling and help him to finally heal and grow from that once and for all. And that's not to say it's not going to come back to haunt him every now and again, but he has better tools based upon the work we've done to deal with it. But I understand it's got to be small. So just make it a practice to start talking about the simple things you're struggling with on a day in and day out basis. You don't have to do it all at once, but you have to do it. Number 2, practice self-compassion. Now, this is not self-loathing. This is self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. Especially as men, you need to hear me say this, because I don't think some of you believe this. Every single man has areas of weakness. Every single man struggles. Every single man has blown it a time or two. Every single man has some sense of fear in them that they're going to blow it again. You aren't any different. You may feel that way because of the way the other guys talk around you. You may feel that way because of what you see on social media. But the reality of the matter is every single man has vulnerability. Every single man struggles. The important thing that you recognize here is you are not alone. And when you are not alone, you can have more compassion on yourself for the times that you struggle, for the thoughts of your shortcomings, for the fears of what may or may not be. If we can recognize our struggles and we can give ourselves some space to struggle through them in the right ways, but if we can give ourselves some space to struggle through them, we will be far better off. Number 3, seek support. If you want to embrace vulnerability, you've got to get to a place where you seek outside support. I was on a coaching call with a client yesterday, and that's one thing I said to him. I said, when you face an emotional challenge, when you face a negative circumstance, we've been working through helping him, like in my guide, helping him to identify and challenge his negative thoughts. But he still deals with them. And so I said to him, you need to give yourself some space to just hurt, to be sad, to be angry. But then you need to understand how you got there and how you get out of it. And too often, we're not good enough to do that on our own. I mean, I coach men and women, but all day long on this stuff. And yet, when I struggle, I seek support because we typically don't do a good job of working through these things for ourselves. We need outside objective eyes and ears to help us process through. And sometimes we just need somebody that's good enough to ask the right types of questions so we can answer out loud and hear for ourselves the truth or untruth of what we're thinking. My good friend Sam Feeney, who's one of the co-founders of our Founders Collective community, he calls this the clearing committee. And I love this. It's you throw your junk on the table, and I'm paraphrasing this, but you throw your junk on the table, and then your clearing committee, one or multiple people, my whole mastermind does this for me very often, they just start asking questions to clear all the thoughts out of your head, to get it all on the table. You want to be careful to not go to people that are just going to be quick to give you advice. You want to go to people that are going to be good at asking you questions to help you process things for yourself, because the better you can start to think for yourself, the better equipped you're going to be to deal with these things for yourself. Outside support is going to be objective. It's going to be open. It's going to be honest. It should be aligned. You should have similar values to the people that you trust the most, and you should see them putting to practice the same things that you guys are talking about. They may not have the exact same struggles, but they should be putting the same practices into place of progress, of a desire to achieve, of a desire to impact, of a desire to serve, a desire to sacrifice, a desire to be good husbands and fathers. You want all of these things. You don't want people just throwing advice your way that aren't putting it into practice themselves. That's no good. No good. And I see a lot of guys that do that, and I have a lot of opinions there, but just avoid them at all costs. Mm-hmm. And number 4, the fourth practical step as it relates to embracing vulnerability is to embrace imperfection. I don't know if this is news to you, but I have a news flash. You and I are not perfect. We never will be. Only Jesus was. And only he will ever be. That's good news for us. I mean, yeah, it sucks. I'd like to do something perfectly. But the good news is because I'm not perfect, I don't have to set that standard for myself. I need to realize that I'm going to fall short, that I'm going to struggle, I'm going to sin. I'm going to err over and over and over again. That gives me the space to screw up, but it also gives me the space to grow. When I don't feel like I have to have it all together, I can be far more vulnerable with myself and those around me. You see, when I'm pretending like I'm perfect, when I'm pretending like I got it all together, when I'm pretending like I'm dialed in, when I pretend like I'm nailing it, I have to live up to that standard, that non-existent, impossible standard of perfection. And so do you think that I would ever be vulnerable? I used to never be vulnerable because I was always trying to put up this facade that I was crushing it in every area of my life until my life came crushing down on me. And I almost ruined my marriage and almost lost everything that I had. It took a devastating event for me to realize that pretending to be perfect was one of the worst things that I could ever do. And in a moment of vulnerability with a coworker, my life began to change, and it's changed forever. My encouragement to you would be to embrace the fact that you are not perfect, that you never will be, and that's okay. That doesn't mean we stop striving for perfection. We stop striving for greatness. But when we strive for perfection, we know we're going to miss it, but we're going to get dang close sometimes, and it's going to feel really good. Don't settle for less than the best, but just know you'll never be ultimate, and that's okay. Man, I cannot encourage you enough to go back and listen to the first 2 episodes of this series, The Unstarved Man, and then continue subscribing to this podcast either through your favorite audio platform or through YouTube, because we've got more coming. I've got a couple of other incredible episodes coming up that I definitely want to share with you. And in the meantime, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear from you. And I've got something for you, by the way, towards the end here. So don't go anywhere just yet. I would say that if you've got feedback, I would love to hear from you. A private DM, an email, ryan@ryanjamesmiller.com. Yes, I'm crazy giving out my personal email address, but I want to hear from you. I want to know, like, are these things hitting home for you? Are these episodes, are these topics helpful for you? Is there something that I say that causes confusion that I can help to clear up for you? I want to be supportive of you. Also, if you feel alone, I want to encourage you to join our Founders Collective community. It's specifically for male founders and entrepreneurs, but our discussions, our weekly collaborative discussions where we all hop on the phone or on video and we all have discussions around our challenges, our ideas, our goals, they are so uplifting, but they are so vulnerable. And I'm one of the first ones to go first in terms of just airing it all out there, because I believe that going first gives other people the permission to go. If I'm going to be a leader, that's one of the things that I have to lead in. And I want to encourage you to do the same thing. So to throw feedback my way, if there's anything that I can do for you, please let me know. I want to do a giveaway too. So give me just a second. I'm going to offer up a giveaway at the end of this episode. Next, go grab our guide. A guide to identifying and challenging negative thoughts. That guide is one of our most downloaded resources. I've been talking about it a lot on this specific episode, but trust me when I tell you, it's an incredibly simple tool to help you begin to process the negativity that's finding its way into your head and helping you to get it out as quickly as possible. So you can download that by clicking the link in the show notes. And then finally, here's what I'm going to do. For the first person that comments on YouTube, specifically, whatever your comment is, as long as it's constructive, the first person that comments on YouTube on this specific episode, anything you want, you could say hi, you could ask a question, you could offer up some advice. Shoot, you could just retype your name. I'm going to offer a gift pack to you of a Be Authentic hat, Be Authentic shirt, a signed copy of my book, Wounds, and a few other really cool things. Just as a way of saying thank you for getting to the end, for listening to this episode, for supporting me in all the ways that you have. I just want to say thank you to you. And honestly, thank you. You guys have been an incredible support. So make sure you continue to subscribe to upcoming episodes or to the podcast via video or on your favorite audio platform. The next episode that we're going to be doing is going to be talking about relationships called The Ties That Heal. So we're going to be talking about the importance of building like-minded community, how to do that, what to look for, characteristics to look for, characteristics to run from. So I really want to talk about the benefits to building like-minded community and how that is going to help you ultimately become the man that I believe you've been created to be, which is a man of greatness. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your support. Cannot wait to share this next episode with you guys. Until then, go live as the men and women that God has created you to be. Thanks, guys.